Hello and welcome back to Messianic Bible Study with me, Elias Kanani. One thing that I wanted to get started with today was a little discussion about matriarchies. I talked about this, I don't remember, last week, the week before that, when I was going through Genesis 19. And it's one of those topics that I don't study. And so it's like I don't really have a whole lot of information on it. But I did a little bit of research and a couple things came up. First of all, surprise, surprise, feminists and egalitarians love the idea. It is like an idol to them. I was reading this one article. What was it called? The matriarchal prehistory, something along those lines. It was a review of the book of the same title. And basically, this was an expert in the field of anthropology, archaeology, like that area. And she was just talking about how the matriarchal prehistory. So, first of all, matriarchal prehistory is this idea that when you look at prehistoric items, and prehistory means before we started writing things. When you look at prehistoric, let's say, well, just anything that's prehistoric, the theory goes that they typically are woman-centered. Like, there's always the divine woman. There's always, like, the omnibenevolent, divine female utopian ideal that happened prehistory. Like, that was what it was. And then, of course, we talked a little bit about the reason that this came up was because of Lot's daughters and the Moabites, who some scholars believe was the Moabites were a matriarchal society. But we actually have other matriarchal societies that we know about. One of them is, like, they're around today. One of them is the Kosuo in China. One of them is the Kunai in India. And then there are a couple others. One of them, actually, they believe that Kush, Ethiopia, was, at least during the time of Egypt, was a matriarchal society. So, the really interesting thing about this is that you have all of these patriarchal societies, like you have Egypt, patriarchal, you have Babylon, you have most of the Canaanite tribes, and then you have a couple that are like prominent matriarchal societies. Cush would be one, and then Moab would be another. And this is, of course, assuming that the scholars are right on both of those, because if you look at the scholarship, it's a little bit of a stretch. First of all, it's not entirely certain that there has ever been a purely matriarchal society. That is, all of the realms of government are inhabited by women and only women. Like, you get that in some patriarchal societies where all of the realms of government are only inhabited by men. And of course, then you have to get into the question of what is government. Because I think most of the time we think of government as like some sort of formal, top-down dictatorial regime. When, like, you have spontaneous outgrowths of governments all the time. Like, you could say that Twitter is technically a government, but it's in the private sector because it's not a formal government, but they govern. And so you have sort of that tension. But when you talk about, like, the formal governments in the past, you get primarily, when it comes to patriarchal societies, you get certain regimes that are only filled with men in the leadership positions. Greece, Rome, Egypt, I believe, was Assyria. But then you get patriarchal societies where the top, like, all forms of government are filled with men and women. You get Persia, you get, I believe, Babylon, you get Israel, you get a lot of these mixed societies, and then you get the matriarchal societies. But the issue with the matriarchal societies is it's not certain if any of them are entirely filled with women, except for a couple. I think there was this one tribe in Kenya, if I remember right, where it's a tribe built. It's a modern tribe founded in like 1997 or something, um, made up entirely of women running away from domestic violence, and they get together and they form this tribe. So that's the tribe. And then you have another one. Where was it? I forgot the name, but it's this tribe where like they don't even get to be part of the uh, they don't even get to be part of the family meetings. They don't get to be part of any in any level of the government. But there's like two of them, if that. Like it's difficult because when you read this scholarship, oftentimes you have to wade through the excited naivete of feminist scholars who really want to find that. They want to find like an ideal woman centric society. Now, if you get like, if there was such a thing as a Meninist, I know that that's a thing, but like if that was a serious political movement, then you would get something similar. They would look at the different societies in the world, and you wouldn't be able to trust their scholarship because they're looking for an ideal male-centered society. But that is generally to say that I think a lot of people, they believe that like a matriarchal society wouldn't be able to succeed, and there's a lot of evidence for that. For instance, none of them did. Kush is gone. It's not really all of these matriarchal societies or tribes that scholars point to are just that. They're still stuck in the tribal state of civilization. And of course, it may be a, what do you call, a bias towards modernism and sort of an evolutionary model of civilization where you think that there's a progression, an upward trajectory of civilization where you begin with tribes and then you move up to larger networks of humans, which I think is that theory is fairly ubiquitous when it comes to like laymen. For instance, the logic is pretty straightforward. You have a small group of people. They get together. They only need to worry about a small group of people. And as you get more groups of larger groups of people coming together, you have to figure out some sort of structure that works for that larger group of people. And in the evolutionary model of things, what you would get is the ones that have a solid government that 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 is that allows for large groups of people to come together, those ones are the ones that tend to grow and dominate in a particular region. And then, of course, you get like a bunch of these societies growing up and becoming larger, and then eventually you get the you get city states. You go from tribe to village to city state, and then eventually you get a bunch of city states together to create a what's it called, a state, and then you get those together to produce provinces of a nation, and then you get those together to produce an empire. And of course, right now we're trying to produce a global empire, but the idea is how advanced does a particular regime's doctrine allow for a particular allow for a certain people to get. The Christian, the Judeo-Christian, the biblical doctrine allows allows for people to basically become a global empire, which is known to man. It is the best thing. If you look at a tribe and you see that they cannot move past a tribe, now the one in Kenya, of course, it was founded in 1997, so you're not really going to be looking at that for data on the as a data point. But you look at Kush, you look at ancient Kush, and you see how it interacted with Egypt, with Israel. The Queen of Sheba is one of those likely people that matriarchs in Kush that interacted with Israel. And you see how that society evolved or changed or even was dominated by another society that was able to band more peoples together. And you see which ones were able to produce the best offense, the best defense, the best cohesive culture, the best mythos, the best religion or cult. Like which society and regime was able to produce the best of these, and then the measure of a society would be how many people it can get to cohere. And you see that typically these societies are pure monogamous societies. That is, you can have one partner at a time. Now, some of the matriarchal societies are like that, but you would call them, what would you call them? What's a word that I'm looking for? Sort of like altered monogamy. I'm pretty bad with words, but you'd call it an altered monogamy sort of society where you have one partner, but you can change it at any time that you want. The one where the society that sort of forces two people to be together by law, unless particular boundaries are broken, that society goes further than the altered monogamy society, which goes further than the polyamory, the polygamy society, which goes even further than the non-ogamy society, the one that doesn't even have any sexual rules. So sex is one of those things that when it is well regulated, it produces a better society. Another one is religion. When a religion at least pretends to get to an objective truth, and if you go against this truth, then you go against the culture, it goes further. It's a better society than a society that has a religion where everybody can basically decide what they want. So a monotheistic society goes further than a polytheistic society. The type of society where you say, well, you worship Zeus, I worship Diana. Okay, we're good. All that. And that society goes even further than the society that claims that every person has their own religion, their own truth. And so you have the regulated sexuality, the objective truth monotheistic societies. And then there's one more that I forgot, but you have these principles where societies, they sort of build each other up, and eventually they evolve into the regulated sexuality and monotheistic, well, I guess they don't, monotruthist, objective truth societies. And then the last metric that I forgot what it was. And you build, it gets built up into an empire, which is, especially in ancient history, it was the best you could do, especially with a polytheistic empire like Babylon, for instance. And then When those things began to break down, the entire society began to break down. What you also see in these matriarchal societies is if they don't have regulated sexuality, if they don't have objective truth, if they don't have a desire for rationalistic and reason and that sort of stuff, then they flounder. They do not get very far. And that's a story that we get with a lot of these matriarchal societies, the ones that, let's say, the husband and wife don't live together. I think that's the most Suo one. They don't live together. You can break off the marriage at any time. It's more just like you're in your boyfriend and girlfriend. You're dating. You're going steady. That's really what it is. Those societies don't go very far. It's not liberating to, like, I mean, unless you see liberation as complete chaos or anarchy. But they don't go very far. And I apologize for that. And then you get this other thing. I think I've mentioned it before, but there's this idea of two basic regimes in terms of familial rules. You get the tournament society, and in this society, the child basically just stays with the mother because the father he's not in the picture. He sort of sleeps with the girl and then leaves. In a tournament society, basically 95% of men don't end up passing along their genes because the women who can basically sleep with whatever guy they want, and the guy can sleep with any of the women, all of the women only sleep with about 5% of the best men. And by best, you don't look for like nice personality. You don't look for comfortable, soft, teddy bear-esque presence. But by best, you mean the biggest, the strongest, and the most vicious. Why is that? Well, he's not going to stay around. He's not going to be any sort of provider or protector. What he is good for is, while he's there, he fights off anybody who might harm you. And then what else is he good for is passing along his genes. So the only thing that you look at those men for in a tournament society is big, strong, handsome. Let's say that. Vicious as well. In those societies, men basically just kill each other. They compete with each other. Tournament, basically, they compete with each other. The top guy gets all the girls. And because they compete with each other, most of them die because male competition in an unregulated manner leads to a lot of death. In the other type of society, which is the opposite of this one, it was the couple bonding society. Now, this is the prolonged monogamy, not the altered monogamy. This is pure monogamy. This society. In this society, the men and women typically are around the same size. They are generally seen as equal to each other. The men could be the head of the household. Maybe they're not. Maybe they are. They have a lot more involvement in the children's lives. They have children, and because they're going to stick around and all of that, and oftentimes they act in prominent roles within a particular tribe. They're going to stick around, so they need to figure out how to work together. Also, women tend to be a bit more promiscuous in these sorts of civilizations because, well, first of all, if you have a law against, being promiscuous, as opposed to if you don't have a law, then you can only break a law that exists. But second of all, the man is helping with raising the children. He goes to work. He comes back. He is sort of on and off in that sort of way. And if a better guy comes along, she can't just leave. So what often happens in these sorts of societies is a woman will just cheat secretly. Of course, this happens with the men as well, so it kind of goes both ways. But those are the broad pictures of the two different civilizations that you have. The tournament civilizations, again, don't go very far. The entire civilization is based on power. Power, might makes right. I forgot what it's called. Prolonged monogamy, couple pair bonding civilization. Those go a lot further, as we see. Christianity, Judaism, the ones that require two people to figure it out together, go way further than the ones that don't. And so this is another reason why you see a lot of matriarchal societies go away, not progress very far, because they're not actually matriarchal societies. The woman is the center of the tribe because the guy is gone. And why is the guy gone? Because it's a tournament civilization. And so this is why you get this problem with this sort of scholarship is, first of all, it's not clear that a matriarchal society really exists in history. At least not a pure matriarchal society. Second of all, if they have not gotten very far in terms of the general scope of all civilizations. And then third, of course, Bible is generally a patriarchal book. I mean, it is. It's not a pure patriarchal book. It's more of a mixed book. But it is. You get the king, a guy. He's the patriarch of the entire civilization. Then you say, okay, well, God is the king in the New Testament. Yeah, Jesus, who's a guy. And God is generally perceived as masculine. Now you definitely get feminine qualities, but you do have that separation. Oh, and that's another thing. A lot of times these people who look into matriarchal societies, they try to demonstrate how these matriarchal societies are different, but they're not. Well, first of all, if they're trying to demonstrate that they're different and better, then you prove that men and women are different. But second of all, they're not really. Men and women are both equally evil. Men in these matriarchal societies, if it's a pure matriarchy, then the men do not have access to public office. That's just the case. And in a couple of these, I think the couple that I mentioned before, the men don't have access to public office or really any office. And by all metrics that the feminist would use when talking about a patriarchal society and the oppression of women, that is male oppression. That is the oppression of the men in those societies, which means matriarchal societies have the same pathologies as a patriarchal society. It's not better in any sort of way. And of course, the Bible's not a matriarchal. The Bible does not put forward a matriarchal society. Okay, so with that, let's get into the Biblios. Genesis 21. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son, who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him, and Sarah said, God has made laughter for me, Everyone who hears will laugh over me." And she said, "Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age." And the child grew and was weaned. And Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing. So she said to Abraham, "Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac." And the thing was very displeasing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Be not displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for through Isaac shall your offspring be named. And I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, but he is your offspring. Because he is your offspring." So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot, for she said, "Let me not look on the death of the child." And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven, and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Up, lift up the boy, and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water, and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness, and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. At that time Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, "God is with you in all that you do. Now, therefore, swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me, or with my descendants, or with my posterity. But as I have dealt kindly with you, so you will deal with me, and with the land where you have sojourned." And Abraham said, "I will swear." When Abraham reproved Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized, Abimelech said, "I do not know who has done this thing. You did not tell me, and I have not heard of it until today." So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a covenant. Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock apart, and Abimelech said to Abraham, "What is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs that you have set apart?" He said, "These 7 ewe lambs you will take from my hand, that this may be a witness for me that I dug this well." Therefore that place was called Beersheba, because there both of them swore an oath. So they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, rose up and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned many days in the land of the Philistines. So, beginning up here with the birth of Isaac. We remember last week, we talked a little bit about Abraham, how he might have thought that the promise was only for him. But we do see here sort of the, as we were talking before about sort of the matriarchal societies and the feminists, Sarah is being lifted up to a status that's not only the wife of Abraham, although that is her primary role. Because she is the wife of Abraham, because she herself is faithful to God, she also receives the promise. She was right along with Abraham when they were producing the meat for the foreigners that came and dwelt within the tent. So she is in agreement with the acts of Abraham. Where was Hagar when that happened? She was minding her own business, presumably. So even though she has faith in God, she still has sort of this disbelief that, like, God truly does have power over this world. But then we get this little episode when the child grew and was weaned, so 2 or 3 or whatever, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing. Now, what we get in the New Testament is a little bit of a sort of difference in interpretation here. Paul in Galatians uses this passage here to sort of create a metaphor. He's saying that the slavish attitude is the same attitude that Hagar had, and her fruit, Ishmael, is the fruit of slavery. And Sarah, on the other hand, she represents the people of promise, heavenly Jerusalem. Hagar is earthly Jerusalem, while Sarah is heavenly Jerusalem. Now, as a Messianic, this can be kind of challenging. You might fall into the same trap that most Christians fall into, but recognize that Galatians was like the first letter that Paul wrote, and we don't really have the context that prompted this letter. And so we're not entirely sure. We know a little bit about it. We know that there are these people who are trying to entice the Galatians into a form of Jewish paganism. That is, they're trying to entice these believers in Galatia to Judaism, but it's not like just rabbinic Judaism. It's like Judaism in the same category as heathen paganism. And so what we get from what this earthly Jerusalem, these earthly Judeans, they're sort of like this sect, this highly, I don't want to use the word conservative, but highly conservative, highly nationalistic, highly insulated from all the rest of the world. You have to be a Jew. You have to perform certain rituals in order to be saved. And Paul is saying that's not the case. You're saved as soon as you enter into the faith, whether you're Jew or Greek, any of that sort of stuff. And so what that tells us a little bit is what the attitude of Hagar and Ishmael was. Hagar and Ishmael were trying to tell Isaac and Sarah, they were trying to be the masters of Isaac and Sarah, as opposed to allowing Abraham to be the master, because Abraham is the head of the household. They were, Ishmael was laughing. And this is traditionally seen as to laugh in mockery, to scorn, to sort of put under your boot. The idea is that he's trying to lift himself up over Isaac. He's saying, I'm the firstborn. All this belongs to me. You're going to be a servant in my tents. So he's trying to put Isaac under slavery. He's trying to enslave Isaac, in other words. He's saying, my mother may have been a slave at one time, but now she married Abraham. So now she has removed herself from the status of slave and now is the wife of Abraham. And not only is she the wife, but she is the woman who brought Abraham a son. In those days, of course, that was a great honor. Sarah is a reproach. She has this evidence of shame all around her because of her fruitlessness, because she can't bear a son. And now she finally does, so Ishmael is like, okay, well, that has nothing to do with my position. He's a second-born. I'm the firstborn. So he's using these human customs, which, God oftentimes upends, but most of the time he is sort of working within the realm of human custom. But Ishmael's using this human custom and saying that Isaac, you are always going to be the second-born. But God is saying, actually, Isaac is the child of promise, he is going to rule over you. You're going to have to leave if you're continuing to act in this way. And so what we get in Galatians, at the very least, is you get this sect of Judaism that is sort of trying to enslave the Christians in Galatia. And they are secret believers. So they're not like rabbinic Jews. These are people who say that they believe in Jesus. They come in and they say, the only way that you can be saved is if you perform these particular rituals. Now, of course, these particular rituals are good. In fact, Isaac was circumcised. And so the whole issue of circumcision that is in Galatians is not really talking about whether or not we should get circumcised, but the whole issue is whether or not we are saved by circumcision, by this particular ritual. And Paul is saying no. To act like a ritual saves you, or a ritual essentially changes you, is to act like God is basically susceptible to sorcery. I perform these particular rites. I don't it doesn't have anything to do with my heart. I perform these rites on my body, and now I move from God's bad graces to his good graces. But Paul is saying, no, that's not how it works. It is by faith that you have been saved, not by rituals. Now, your faith may lead you to do those rituals, which is a good thing, but it's not by faith that it's not by those rituals that you have been saved. You're putting the cart before the horse. Jesus says, cleanse the inside of the cup, and then you can cleanse the outside. And that's what Paul is talking about. Now, it's a little bit of a tangent, but sometimes I like to read these stories as if you're plugging the allegorical figures into their positions in this story. So Paul's allegorical person here, the allegory for Hagar would be these pagan Jews, these sorcery-esque Jews. And the allegory for Isaac or Sarah would be the true believers, the true Jews. So she said to Abraham, so Sarah, seeing this mockery happening, says to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac. Now, this is an interesting dynamic. So first of all, Sarah is lifted up in honor. She's become somebody, her reproach has been removed from her, and now she is in a more prominent position. She has had her name changed, and the Lord has visited Sarah with regard to her. It's not just about Abraham, it's about her as well. She still defers to Abraham. So Abraham is still the head of the household. So we don't get any egalitarianism here. And Sarah continuously calls Hagar the slave woman. So I suppose if you were inclined to think that Sarah is doing something wrong here, then you would also be inclined to think that female leadership is just as pathological as male leadership. So there is that. But I don't think that that's actually the case. I think both Abraham and Sarah see something that is actually true here, actually a problem. And we get this in this whole story. Hagar does not have what it takes to be the wife of Abraham. She did not help with showing hospitality to these angels, even though Abraham, who was 3 days ago circumcised, did. Sarah did all the work. Hagar is acting like she doesn't have any skin in the game in terms of this family. She's acting on her own self-interest. Ishmael is mocking Isaac. Now, what kind of son of Abraham mocks another child of Abraham? What Jesus says is, if you say to your brother Rakah, then you will be guilty of, or you will be condemned to hellfire, or something along those lines. You don't mock each other, but Ishmael did. But Abraham loves his son. It's displeasing to Abraham this whole thing is displeasing to Abraham. But God also sees the attitude and the character of Hagar and Ishmael. And he says, be not displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman. So he also views Hagar as not a wife, but a slave, because she's not acting like a wife, she's acting like a slave. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for through Isaac shall your offspring be named. And I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring. Now, and we get this continuous thread that God blesses the people around Abraham because of Abraham. So when God shows his grace to somebody, to me, to you, and he has made us righteous because of our faith, it's not just us that reap the benefits of that. The people around us also get blessed. Now, to what extent is that blessing? Not really sure. But the people around us get blessed because God has blessed us. In fact, the people around us get blessed. God blesses us so that we can bless those around us. But God says, do as Sarah says to you, for through Isaac shall your offspring be named. Now, etc. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. Now, 2 questions here. Abraham is not too far from Egypt. There are other city-states in Canaan. In fact, there are Philistines. Philistines are a prominent people group. There are the Baal worshippers. There are all these different groups of people. Jacob later makes it to Padanaram in 2 days, or something along those lines. A whole skin of water should last a decent amount of time. Bread should last a decent amount of time. But you get a little bit of Hagar's character here. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the child under one of the bushes. So when the water of the skin, when the bread is gone, first of all, why did they not make it to a city? Do they not know their way around this area? They've been wandering in the desert for who knows how long, at least 13 years. In fact, why didn't they just go to Abimelech? That's right where they were living. They could have gone to a Philistine city. They could have gone to Egypt. Hagar's a native-born Egyptian. In fact, she knows the way back home, presumably. And it wouldn't have taken more than a couple days to do that. So, question 1, why did she not end up in a city? Question 2, why did she run out of water? Okay, you're in the desert. Understandable. You have a flask of water. Make it last a couple days. You have some bread. Show self-control. So, and also, apparently she's not dying. Her son is dying of thirst, but she's not dying. So who's been drinking the water? Who's been eating the bread? Her son's 13 at this point. It just goes to show that Hagar is not a saint. In fact, she probably has a lot of issues, character flaws. She's probably indecisive, selfish, doesn't really care for her child all that much, more just wants to exalt herself and lift herself up. And she doesn't want to go to a city, even if it is to save her child. So she makes all of these decisions to basically just cause her own destruction. And so the child is about to die. And then she went and sat down opposite him a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot, for she said, let me not look on the death of the child. And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy. So many people ask, okay, why did God hear the voice of the boy and not the voice of Hagar? She's the one lifting up her voice and weeping. And a lot of people have thought, well, it's because God is sexist or whatever. No, it's because Hagar is a terrible person. God heard the voice of the boy because he's not a terrible person yet. Because, I mean, although he's like 13, so he's just getting into his character and everything. But we also see a bit of a distinction. What God says to Hagar, he says, he calls Hagar from heaven and says to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Up, lift up the boy, and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. The first time God visits her is because she's pregnant 13 years earlier, and she had just been suffering some sort of harsh punishment from Sarah. So in that story, Sarah was sort of to blame there. It was kind of her fault that this was happening. And God sees Hagar. He's not looking at what Hagar will be. He's looking at Hagar at that moment and saying, the situation you're in is bad, and you have not really demonstrated the bad character. You have a little bit, but I'm going to show mercy to you. Now, God still shows her mercy, but now he's starting to show less regard for her because she has continuously operated under this bad character. She has done the things that have led to this boy's imminent death. So God says, I'm listening to the boy now. You are not a great mother. And what this tells us about God's character is he doesn't look at our entire, like, when he talks to you right now, he's not looking at what you will do. He's not looking at what you have done. He's looking at what you are, the situation you're at right now. He's looking at the things you have not repented of. And he's looking at what you could be if you choose life. All of that other stuff, he doesn't judge a person based on what they might have done in their life. All that comes later. If they do it, then he judges them for it. But he doesn't judge people for things they haven't done. They have to do it in order for God to judge it. That's his character. And so when you think about, like, let's say, I'm a little distracted. I have this question a lot of times for Calvinists. I say, okay, well, of course, humans are totally depraved, and everybody is going to hell unless God compels them and gives them the ability and also the actions of repentance and faith in Christ. Then you say, what about babies? This is the whole born into sin question. What about babies that die? Well, supposedly they are also born into sin. In fact, they are born into sin. Are they judged for that sin that they're born into? The question, or the answer that I get from the Calvinists is, God knows which ones are elect. So, in other words, first, two problems with that. First, God is judging babies for things they haven't done and torturing them for all eternity. Okay. Second of all, you don't have to confess or believe. It's all about being elect. So, if God saves the elect babies, they have never made a confession. They have never believed in their heart that Jesus is Lord. They haven't done that. So the entire ideology sort of is self-contradictory. It doesn't hold up to its own weight. And that's an issue. But the more important part is what we see in the Bible is God doesn't judge people for things that they have not done. God even predicted to Hagar, your son's going to be a wild donkey of a man with his hand against every brother. He's going to have a fall amongst his brothers, a fallen character. Doesn't matter. At the point in time right now, in Genesis 21, God's saying, I'm listening to the boy. He's 13, he's a kid. I'm going to show mercy to him. Partly because he really hasn't done anything that bad yet, and partly because, well, he's associated with Abraham. And that's just what the Bible says. At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, God is with you in all that you do. Now, therefore, swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me, or with my descendants, or with my posterity. But as I have dealt kindly with you, so you will deal with me, and with the land where you have sojourned. And Abraham said, I swear it. So this is an example of where the Bible talks about an oath, and there's sort of a couple oral traditions that are authoritative that come that are associated with this oath. First of all, there's a sacrifice. If Abraham swears something to Abimelech, then a sacrifice is brought, a feast is brought, and the idea of the oath is that you're also taking on the death or the consequences of the oath. You're bearing them in your person right now as you make the oath, and you're feeling the weight of them so that you don't break it. Abraham says, I swear this, if I do not deal kindly to you, may I die. And of course, Abimelech says the same thing. Now, Abimelech is the king of the Philistines at this point. And so the Philistines, through history, they break this oath. And so the Philistines, through history, God tells they're breakers of the oath, destroy their villages. He tells the sons of Israel to act as his arm of judgment against these oath breakers, because that is the legal consequence of this oath. And that's just the fact of the matter. And of course, Abimelech is lying. He's saying, act kindly to us as we have dealt kindly to you. And then Abraham says, your servants have seized my wells that I have dug. They've stolen my property and removed my source of living. And Abimelech says, I don't know what you're talking about. You haven't told me anything. But they're his servants. Either he's not governing very well with an open eye, or he's lying here. Most likely he's just lying. That's sort of Abimelech's character. So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a covenant. So taking the sheep and the oxen is a gift to Abimelech, and this is part of the covenant. So then Abraham buys the well that he dug. Now, Abimelech lives in a city-state. Maybe he lives in a little bit of a confederacy of cities. But the land beyond the cities is not Abimelech's. And that's one of the issues here. Abraham can establish a city wherever he wants. Maybe not wherever he wants. That might be a little hyperbolic. But that's Abraham's prerogative. And Abimelech can't just say, like, oh, that's mine. And Abraham would be like, why? And he says, well, because it's 100 kilometers away from my city. No, that's not how it works. Probably not 100 kilometers. That's a little far, but regardless. Cities typically owned the inside the city walls, and then like just outside of the city walls where the villages were, where people actually dwelt. Where Abraham dwelt, there were no people. And so Abraham could dig a well, and the land would be technically his property because he's cultivating the land. And Abimelech's servants seize it, and they say, this is our land because it's near our city. And Abraham says, okay, if we're going to play it like this, take these 7 ewe lambs, as payment for this well that I dug, so that you know these are witness against you that this is my well. At the very least, you can't take this one." And so Abraham sojourned many days in the land of the Philistines, and he called on the name of the Lord. Genesis 22. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, "Abraham," and he said, "Here I am." He said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering, on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you." So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you." And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went, both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb of a burnt offering, my son." So they went both of them together. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham!" And he said, "Here I am." He said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy, or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of the place, "The Lord will provide," as it is said to this day, "On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided." And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven, and said, "Behold, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived at Beersheba. Now after these things it was told to Abraham, "Behold, Milcah, who also has borne children to your brother Nahor, Uz his firstborn, Buz his brother, Kemuel the father of Aram, Chesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. Bethuel fathered Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. Moreover, his concubine, whose name was Reumah, bore Tebah, Gaham, Tahash, and Makkah. Now, this is one of the pivotal stories in the Bible. It's actually also one of the stories that some people find, like some people have trouble with this one, and I've never really understood it. The trouble is, why does God require or request this of Abraham? This seems like a terrible request. And I never understood this because it doesn't happen. God requests it, but it doesn't happen. He stops Abraham from doing it. So the whole point of the story is that he doesn't do it. But for some reason people have an issue with the request itself. But let's put ourselves into the position of Abraham. The people around Abraham sacrificed their children. It was one of the practices of the Canaanites. The people of Egypt had human sacrifices. Probably not by the time that Abraham was around, but it was in their history. People all around the globe have had human sacrifices. The question here is not, how could God have asked something like that? The question for Abraham is, does God require something like that? And if he does, when? Now, the answer here is God does not require this. He doesn't require human sacrifice. He doesn't want human sacrifice. In fact, it is an affront to him. It offends him. It's terrible. It's horrible. The whole reason you do not have human sacrifices, you have goat sacrifices or ram sacrifices in this instance, is to demonstrate how much you want to worship God and give to him, but it goes only that far. It goes as far as a bowl in terms of expense. God does not require human life in this sort of way. And this is important because other gods did require this. Now, Israel, they're going to go into the Canaanite nations. They're going to kill these people who are performing human sacrifices. Some of these people are not going to die. Some of these people, Israel is going to let live, and they're going to continue performing human sacrifices. The question for the Israelites is these people they tend to be fairly successful. They're pretty cool guys. They perform human sacrifices. It's a way to worship God. Maybe we should do it. Now, the answer that is shocking enough to stay within their minds is the story of Abraham and Isaac. That Abraham is about to. That Abraham, God doesn't tell Abraham to sacrifice his son because Abraham would sacrifice his son. Most parents that you ask, they'd be like, no, especially in Israel before human sacrifice became a thing there. Most of them would be like that. No, can't do that. I love my children too much. But Abraham loved God more than he loved anything else. And so when God says, sacrifice your son, Abraham says, okay, I'll go do it right now. So the element here is that Abraham is perfectly willing to sacrifice his son. It's not for lack of will that the Israelites do not sacrifice their children. It's not because they're just weak worshippers, but it's because God stops it. He stops it at the last second, but he stops it. And so the answer for the Israelites of whether or not we should sacrifice our children, why are we not doing it, is not that we're just too weak-willed and God actually does require that sort of sacrifice. We just won't do it. The answer is that God hates that sort of sacrifice. So in order to love God, you cannot sacrifice your children. And that's the point of this story. And so I have never understood why this story is really like a sticking point for some people. It is the abolishing of human sacrifice. Like it really is. There's nothing in the story that gives you the hint that human sacrifice is acceptable. And so that's the whole point of this story. Here you have a chiasm, which is a poetry term for these sorts of poems. We have, let's see, the beginning and the end is, and he took the fire, and they both went together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. And then Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb of the burnt offering, my son. So that would be the second part. And he said, behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? So that would be the center of the chiasm. Chiastic. I think chiastic. Chiasm is different. The chiastic structure. Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? So the whole point of the story is, where is the lamb for the burnt offering? The whole point of the story is, what is the lamb? Where is it? And Abraham says, well, God will provide himself a lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And of course, he provides a ram. But the whole point is, what is the sacrifice? What's a proper sacrifice? And the point of the story is not human sacrifice. And then also another thing to remember is Abraham is like 113 at this point, according to the narrative, and Isaac is 30. So Isaac is willing to sacrifice himself for this. He believes in God just as much as the next guy. And what we get in the New Testament is the idea in Hebrews that Abraham, it's not that he just was going to kill his son and then be done, but Abraham understood that Isaac was the child of promise. And so he believed that Isaac was going to be raised from the dead. And so you get this dual meaning here. First, child sacrifice, human sacrifice is wrong. Second, both Abraham and Isaac were in unity in the purpose of God. And third, they were expecting the resurrection to happen at this point. This sacrifice was going to lead to the redemption of the world. And that's why they're doing it. And if you think that, you would never sacrifice a human being for the redemption of the world, well, statistically, you have some issues there. Look at every single regime every single utopian regime that have tried to bring in some sort of messianic, perfect world. It's always built on the backs of millions of dead people. They've chosen their sacrifice. It's not a lamb, but it is humans who disagree with them. And God says that's not how you build the redemption of the world. That's not how this is going to happen. But the Lord will provide for himself the lamb. God's going to bring the redemption. It's not going to be from our efforts. Okay. So Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will provide, as it is said, to this day. On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. So this is also, Mount Moriah is traditionally seen as the Temple Mount. It's one of the names of the Temple Mount. And so one of the questions is, why a ram? Well, one of the sacrifices during Yom Kippur would have been a ram. So this might have been a Yom Kippur sort of sacrifice, like a primordial, of course they don't have the law of Yom Kippur yet, but it might have been a primordial Yom Kippur sacrifice, which would have meant this would have been around fall and all that sort of stuff. So you could sort of place that timing. I'm pretty sure other festivals also have a ram as a sacrifice, but I'm not entirely sure what, it just doesn't come to mind. But it might have been one of those. It might have just been random. I don't think really anything in the Bible is random like that. So it might be pointing towards a particular time of year. But ultimately, this is the Temple Mount. This is the Levitical priesthood through Abraham, through the loins of Abraham, performing the Yom Kippur, the atonement offering for the redemption of the entire world. That is sort of what Abraham is trying to do here. But the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son. I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So, because this whole thing is about atonement, the end result of Abraham's obedience and faith and Isaac's obedience and faith is the sort of pre-humus atonement of the descendants of Abraham. They all received the blessing of God, and they're all the people of God because of Abraham's faith. So if you're a person of God, you are a child of Abraham. If you have faith in Christ, you're a child of Abraham. It's because of this. If you're a Jew, you're a child of Abraham because of this. If you're a chosen person, an elect, an Israelite, it's because you are a child of Abraham. It's because Abraham did this. And then, of course, Milcah had a bunch of children. Now, there was one other thing I wanted to talk about here. Oh, the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time and said, "By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord." So this is just a messenger of God. A lot of times you get this theology of like when the angel of the Lord comes, he has the Lord's name in him and all that sort of stuff, and it's really pre-incarnate Jesus, which it might be. I don't think it is in this specific case, because it says, "Because by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord." So he's delivering a message from Hashem. I think that is it for this chapter. Where am I at on time right now? I'm about there. Well, if you learned anything, let me know. And if you did not, if you thought that I was just horribly misrepresenting the passages and all that sort of stuff, then let me know. I will argue with you. Or, whatever. So, yeah. I hope you have a good week. Bye.